Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on this rainy afternoon. It's a beautiful day here. I love it when it rains. I just got done watching my boys chase piglets around the yard in the rain. It was hilarious. So anyway, ever since I was little, I always loved learning things. I always loved memorizing stuff. When I was 5 years old, I memorized how to spell the word atherosclerosis. People would run up to me, "How do you spell it, Stuart?" You know, Atheroschlerosis, and encyclopedia and other big words. I just always liked that. And as I grew up, I continued to memorize things, and I always wanted to bring stuff with me in the car, right? I'd have to have a book or a table of facts or chart or something anywhere I went. And so maybe some of you can identify with that. You know, you love learning. And so for those people who do love learning, I want to encourage you to do it more. And maybe for people who struggle with it and are not quite there, I'd like to encourage you to start, and see the benefits of it. So one of the benefits when I was younger was just the self-confidence it gave me to have knowledge in your head, that can be applied in a conversation. In the first half of the video, I'll give like the immediate effects that I noticed, and then the longer term results in the second half. So a quick disclaimer, this will be a little bit longer format, but I want to dive just a little bit deeper. It's a very cool topic, and I'm going to give you a challenge at the end. So stay with me there. So as you go through the video, think, how could I apply this to something that I want to do, some goal that I have or interest that I have, because the possibilities are endless. All right, so starting off, when I start learning something, I notice a mental clarity and mental energy that starts to happen that goes to my body. So I want to start moving around. If you've ever watched a child sum numbers in their head and do arithmetic, oftentimes they'll spin in circles and pace and run about the room. Because there's something called total physical response, where to help sort and organize the information in your mind, it helps to move around with your body. And so I like that aspect of the organizing of information. So a quick example here. Last week, I memorized the periodic table of the elements. And we've heard a lot of these elements, scandium, titanium, vanadium, chromium, manganese, iron, cobalt. And then you start to classify them. You go, oh, those are the metals, transition metals. These are the gases over here, helium, neon, argon, and so forth. You start to organize words that you've heard before, and you have a much clearer picture of what's going on, which is cool. Also, it spurs you to dive deeper into your subject, and your natural curiosity starts to expand. So there's a famous quote by Einstein that says, as the circle of your knowledge increases, so does the circumference of your ignorance. So let's say this screen represents everything you don't know. It's your field of ignorance. And inside the circle is what you do know. As you learn more, as that area increases, so does the outside of the circle. In other words, the circumference of your ignorance. As you learn more, you have more questions, and there's more that you realize you don't know. So that's another strange effect. You start learning something, and immediately your mind starts asking questions. And it's very cool. You start making deeper connections. You realize what you're looking at is just an iceberg, and you're seeing the top of it, whereas the vast majority of it is underneath the surface. So a quick example, I'm going to use the periodic table here because that's what I memorized, but you can think about in any field you want. And it's not as important for you to understand the scientific concepts I'm talking about. It's more just the deeper insight that the process of memorization gave me. So quick example here. Every day, starting off, I was just memorizing 18 because there are 18 across the rows here. And as I was doing that, I realized, wow, the ones that are on top of each other, they share the same properties. Like these are metals, these are metals, these are gases. They have the same property. And that's as you increase in atomic number going across these rows. And it started to feel to me like musical octaves, where you play a note and another at a higher octave, a C, and then a higher C. So that the elements higher up on the table were like lower octaves. And then it's replaying those same themes, those same patterns at higher frequencies. And so even if you didn't catch everything I was saying there, the idea is just I started to see beauty at a level that I hadn't seen before. One of the most famous mathematicians in history is Carl Friedrich Gauss. And he said, I can see more beauty in a table of logarithms than I could describe to you. And a table of logarithms is just pages full of decimals to the untrained eye. But to him, he saw all the nuances in it. He could see the beauty inside of it because he had studied it and he memorized it. The dude had a photographic memory. It taught me who was highly honored in the sciences. So from elements about 90 to 112, you have a series of elements in which it ends in ium, like IUM, Einsteinium, fermium. But it's honoring these famous scientists, Einstein and Fermi and Nobel and Lawrence and Rutherford and a whole number of them, Rontgen, Copernicus, and they had elements named after them. So it's honoring those scientists, and it makes you go, hey, I want to learn more about these people. How cool would that be to have an element on the periodic table named after yourself? And so it spurs you to dive deeper. Also, there's Greek and Roman gods that make an appearance, like Thor, right? We have thorium, we have neptunium, uranium, plutonium, Pluto. And so you get to see some interesting things inside there as far as why were they named this, and it spurs you to go even deeper inside there. So going more into the longer term benefits and effects of it, the more I think about memorizing now, I consider it as investing my time in my education, because knowledge and education are going to accrue over time. And so when you have a base of knowledge and you add more to it, it starts making deeper connections. I read a book when I lived in Dallas called The Slight Edge, and it said the difference between successful people and unsuccessful people essentially has to do with not as big of things as you would think. It's the daily choices that they make and the slight edge day by day, the slight improvements day by day by day. There's a compounding effect. And I think absolutely the same happens with learning, memorization, education, is that eventually there's an exponential effect of everything that you learn, and you make connections that will be amazing to you sometimes and amazing to others because you have such a wide base of knowledge. So as an example, the greatest chess player living right now is Magnus Carlsen, and been world chess champion many times. And he, when he was a young boy, he memorized about 10,000 games of the Grandmasters. When he was 11, 12, 13 years old, he made a serious study of all that. And he said at some point it just clicked. Now, that makes sense, right? If you had studied 10,000 games of the Grandmasters, pretty soon you're going to be able to make moves like a Grandmaster. And that's going to happen in a variety of fields. You memorize something and you start to make connections. You're like, whoa, you know a lot more than you realize you did at the beginning for the effort that you put into it. In essence, you're kind of memorizing dots, and then your subconscious is going to make connections with those dots. And you can memorize the connections too. Those would be called formulas, the connections between variables. But you can memorize dots, and your mind is going to start to make all sorts of connections in your subconscious. I would say that's where most of the work takes place for long-term memory, where if you memorize something and you go on a walk, later it's sorting it all out in your mind. There's an author named Jeremy Silman who wrote a book called How to Reassess Your Chess, in which he said, he talked about something called imbalances. And he said that's only any difference between you and your opponent's position in chess, an imbalance. And he said some of the stuff we talk about in this book is complicated. He said, but put the book down and you'll find, you'll pick it up later. Maybe 6 months later, you pick the book up and you find you actually understand the concepts that he was talking about, because your subconscious had time to mull through it and sort it out. It's amazing that happens, but it really does. All right, now, so continuing on from here, let's take a deep breath, because this next one's a big one. It's kind of exciting, but I've been thinking about this one a lot more. And it's to treat yourself like a large language model. And so if you've never heard of a large language model, or LLM, it's what they're using to train AI, the artificial intelligence. That's what engineers are using to train artificial intelligence. What they do, very simplified, is they load this computer program with tens of thousands of pages of information on particular topics, because they want it to become an expert in those topics. And then they basically train this thing how to predict the next word when you ask it a question. So if I said, hey, what are Newton's 3 laws of motion? And it had all this information, it could compile them to predict statistically what's the next word that would come when it's asked, what are Newton's 3 laws of motion? And it'll start stating them. And it is very accurate in giving you correct responses. Chat GPT, GPT-4, and so forth. They're very accurate. I find this fascinating because we are human beings. We've been given the gift of language. We have large memories where we can store vocabulary. And so we can make great leaps in subject areas by using our mind and using our memory. And, we have communication, so do the animals, so do plants. They have chemical messengers, and they communicate through fungi in the soil. And I believe at the very root, the universe is language. And so down to our DNA, you have 4 nucleotide bases that form a complex chemical language with, libraries of information inside our cell. And I think it goes all the way down to the level of atoms. And if that's too much for you, if it's too far out for you to think that the universe is language, it's I don't think it's far-fetched at all. Some people, I'm sure have heard of Terence McKenna. In one of his talks, he said the universe is made of language. I don't mean that as a metaphor. It is made of language. The Eastern religions, they talk about the Om, which is the vibration of the universe, that original sound that permeates. The Bible says by the word of God, the heavens were made, right? God spoke. He said, let there be light, and there was light. So that speaking, that language and sound vibration, everything has its characteristic frequency. It all carries information. Information with sound sounds like language to me. So, you can think what you want about that, but the amazing part to me is that we have that gift and that we can learn language. So front load that information into your mind, that memorization, and then, train your intelligence in what area that you would like to decide. So, one of the guys with the highest IQs in the history of the world, William James Sidis, he had total recall of everything he ever read in his life. So he could read a book and he could basically memorize it word perfect. And so there's a reason a guy like that is considered to have the highest IQ. He can pulse that much information into his mind and make connections between all the different branches of knowledge that he's studied. All right. So I'd like to finish the section on language with a few quotes from Antoine Lavoisier, who is the father of modern chemistry. It's actually coincidental that I memorized some chemistry stuff, and then he's got all these cool quotes about language. But the first one, number one, he said, languages are true analytical tools. Okay, languages are true analytical tools. And number two, he said, I sought nothing more but to improve the chemical language. So he, in essence, is saying he accidentally started modern chemistry. He only sought to improve the chemical language, but in the process of improving the language, he improved the science itself. So number three, he said, it is impossible to dissociate science from language. To call forth a concept, a word is needed. And so think about it. Any concept in science, whether it's force or momentum or acceleration, I'm having to say words to call forth the concept. So it's impossible to separate a science from the language that's used to describe the science. All right. Lastly, it gives you a worthy challenge. And I'd like to leave you with a worthy challenge also. It lets you pursue your own interests and turn it into a game of sorts. I find it's very fun to memorize things. And you don't have to do the periodic table. You can memorize a list of 5 things. And in fact, I did that just the other day with this book right here, Question-Based Selling. It's an old sales book. But I don't know the first thing about business hardly, or sales. I admire people that do well in business because it seems so ethereal to me, right? But I memorized the 5 prerequisites to closing a sale. Locked them in my memory, and I'll let my subconscious be working on that so I get better in a field that I want to do better in. So think about, for you, can you put something on flashcards? If you have to study for an AP test, say you're making slow progress in something. Maybe the problem is that you don't know the fundamental definitions or principles of that subject. And if you apply them to your memory, then you'll start making connections while you sleep. And so I'm going to leave you with this challenge. I want you guys to come up with something that you enjoy, that you want to do. Man, you could be interested in art, so you want to learn all the periods of art history and the major artists in each period. The possibilities are endless here, and you can think about your own. But comment below and tell me what you came up with, and I want to hear that you did it. And so, comment below, let me know. And if you've got a challenge for me, I'd like to see some interesting challenges for memorization also. I could recite the periodic table if you want. I'll shoot for under a minute if I recite it. If that's something you'd like to see, let me know. And if you like this longer format for videos and you enjoyed it, just let me know. Give a thumbs up. Subscribe if you like this stuff. But yeah, guys, it's been good. I hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.